Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us again for another vCenter Configuration Manager expert demo walkthrough. Today, we truly do have one of the experts of the product. He's been called many things: evangelist, guru, etc. It's George Gerchow. George is currently, and correct me if I get this wrong, George. Currently, he is the director of the Center for Policy and Compliance, the team that's responsible for building all those great out-of-the-box templates for the standards and regulations that make vCenter Configuration Manager so valuable. Thank you very much, George, for joining us today.
Yeah, Dave, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today and walking through this exercise. And you are correct. I am the pretty face that in front of the Center for Policy and Compliance, but there's definitely a lot of good, hard-working folks who support that content and get the job done.
Nice. Pretty face. Is that on your business card then?
Well, it just depends on what viewpoint you're looking at it from, but I got to give a shout out to those guys. They're the ones that do the real work. I just get all the glory.
Yeah, those guys are great. So I was hoping maybe today we could do a kind of a shorter version of the walkthrough. We've done some deep dives into Linux, virtualization, etc. Maybe kind of a high level how it all plays with not just compliance, but maybe change and closing that loop from a closed loop change management standpoint and bringing it all together.
Absolutely. I mean, that sounds like a great idea. Let's focus a lot on that, and that'll definitely appeal outside of the U.S. market as well, too, where change detection and configuration drift is still a major issue, even after you're virtualized, and we definitely help out with that. So, should we get started?
Yeah, I'll hand the keys over to you, sir.
All right, and then please feel free to chime in and ask any questions. So the first thing you see is obviously vCenter Configuration Manager. This is our latest and greatest version, which is 5.4. All web-based, so I'm just hitting a URL to get to it. Just to give you a quick idea, I just need to have permissions across the systems that I'm leveraging, and then for me to have a role set up within the tool, it all depends on what my access is that I can set up on these roles. So complete role-based access, as you can see here, I have a few built out, and we'll just go through these at a high level. So AD user, this is someone who logs in and just sees AD information, so how my sites are mapped out, what my objects are, what changes are taking place at an AD level. Admin, this is what we're going to log in as today. This is full-on rights to set up the tool, be able to do full remediation, access all data I want to, whether it's virtual, physical, whatever it may be, Unix, Windows. I can do anything I want within the product. Now I can really start segmenting things down, though, by data type. So in this case, I'll just see ESX host once I log in, or I can increase that to see guests if I want to, but you guys are starting to get the picture. What systems I can see, and then what data I can access, and what actions I can take based upon role. My all-time favorite, information security, where I can log in, get full compliance reports, run whatever change detection reports I need to, but not have the ability to make changes out there. Workstations, I guess, Dave, we don't talk about this enough, do we? This is where we log in and we just see desktops out there, and we can take actions against them as well. So we have desktop coverage, and especially Mac is important to point out there because a lot of Macs are starting to pop up, and people don't have a management solution for them. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and just log in as admin. Once I log in as admin, where I usually like to start, especially with customers, is at the highest level, which is the dashboards we have built into the tool. And it's great because we're taking 80 to 100,000 data elements, but every time we say that to people, it can get rather scary. Like, wow, well, more data, that's all I need is more data within my environment. But in this case, I'm taking that data and I'm making it actionable and useful. So now that I'm bringing this data up, in this case it happens to be our own vSphere hardening guidelines, I now can see I have these pie charts built out. So green is good, red is bad. And then I have the capability to really start breaking it down by data class. So what parts of the environment is it that I'm really starting to fail in? So you can see right here my network services, my IP info, that's where I'm really starting to struggle within this virtual infrastructure. And I can continue to go on down and start seeing more detailed information about what actions I may need to take moving forward. So not just limited to virtualization, we just released our brand new DISA content update, which affects HIPAA, GLBA, and lots of other standards out there as well. But you can see having these comprehensive dashboards at the highest level really starts giving me an idea of what my compliance posture looks like across the organization. So the before, Dave, we talked a little bit about change, so let's just kind of go through an exercise here where we make a change on a local OS. I think it's always a good place to start because if things didn't change, I would probably always be compliant. I wouldn't have configuration drift, obviously. And then shift is a good thing, right? I mean, I always constantly need to update my builds to make sure they're optimized back to the business. So let's start working on a scenario here. So this scenario could be where someone calls up service desk, and we went through this exercise before, and they need access to a different system out there. You know, they can't access an application, or they're getting blocked out of a share. So what typically happens when someone gets calls up service desk like that is you have a junior admin that will just completely give them domain rights. Now, a lot of people like to say, oh, that never happens, but Dave, you and I both know it happens all the time in IT shops, right?
Absolutely. The easiest path is always the one chosen, right? So if I can just say, here's everything you need, I'll, move on to the next ticket.
That's right. So now I can get that information in, and, next thing you know, I have a complete breach that's taken place within the environment. And the other problem that happens too is if this person ends up moving departments or whatever it may be, now they have these extensive rights within the infrastructure. So here we went ahead and created that user. Now we're going to come back into groups and we're going to add them to local admin group. And I can tell you from experience, this guy is definitely someone we never want to see in any environment. One of those nicknames out there for him has been Despicable Me, just because of the damage that he can cause within the infrastructure. So let's do a couple of things too. And this one's more of another scenario where, let's say he built out a service within the infrastructure. Okay, and let's just pick one here that's not going to harm us too much. And he was using his account to manage this. This happens all the time as well, Dave. This is one of those situations where all of a sudden you have an admin who builds a box, they put SQL on it or they put backup on it, and they use their own domain account to go ahead and run that service.
Right, assuming they're going to be there forever, right?
Exactly, assuming they're going to be there forever, and then next thing you know, they leave or they change departments and the rights change again. And then what ends up happening to that service? It blows up, and it blows up in mass, and we see this happen, quite a bit out there. So while we do that, we'll continue with the demo, but you saw we just added them there, and like if I come in now and just to give you guys a sneak peek, okay, so I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to go into operating system on the Windows side, and we'll come down into security, which is my favorite portion of the product. You can see it's a huge product, right? Lots of data that we collect, but again, we take that, make it useful and actionable. But as I click on local accounts here, it's going to give me this great overview of passwords requires, password never to expire, but I just want to verify that we already don't have them sitting within our database. So I'm going to drill down here and take a look. And again, we do these administrator accounts by SID, so we know that they're the actual administrators within the account. I'm dragging and dropping, so I did that. I dragged and dropped up into column grouping so you can see all the different admins, okay? So we're not seeing them here. So let's go ahead and kick off a manual collection. Now, obviously, I can automate any of this, so I automate my collections of data out there within the environment. In this case, I'm just doing it manually because I want to detect that change of that individual that was just added to the local administrators group and is running that service.
So you're just picking the one machine and the one data type or two or three data types that you're interested in grabbing right now as an example. But in the real world, you'd have all this running at night, doing it across all your different types of, let's say, all of your Windows machines, gathering this type of data. And obviously this would be only something you would do in a demo.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, you're 100% right. A manual collection, a demo is mostly where you're going to do it. You would automate all this stuff at night, like you said, or I'd have certain data types I may run during the day, so certain things like is antivirus up and running and things like that. But most of the time, manual collections are saved for, like if someone asks me for something instantly, like if they come back and say, how many versions of SQL you have out there, or how many versions of Internet Explorer, who's a member of this domain group, I may kick off a manual collection, but you're totally right, Dave, and on track. I mean, most of the time, all this stuff is scheduled, and that's down in the administrative grid, which we'll touch on lightly towards the end of the demo.
Great.
Now that we have that, I'm sorry, Dave, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're good.
And so, now that we have that out there, so we scheduled this job, and you actually have a way to track your jobs and see if they're running or not. What we want to start doing, though, is really start, oh, wow, look at that. That's pretty quick. So good work of Jeremy Gibson out there. So then now what we're going to do is come back in here, and you can see we have several different dashboards up top, but then we also have this change management piece. Now, one of the things that we hear all the time is, God, regulatory compliance is just not that important to me right now, in a virtual infrastructure. I may have problems with PCI, but I'll tell you the one thing, Dave, that everybody has issues with, and that is change. So we have two different types, VCM initiated. Well, this is cool. These are the changes that we make, but this one is really great. This is non-VCM initiated. So, Dave, if someone comes up locally on the box like we just did and made a change, or if someone runs a script against a machine or uses another tool out there, we're going to capture that actual change. Now, the power in that comes in once that actual change is made, I can now reconcile that back to service desk. Now, obviously, there's a couple ways to do that. One, if I don't even have integration between the two, I can still take a manual change management report and start doing checks and comparisons back in VCM to see any extra change that took place. A little tedious, very manual. However, can be effective, right? It can get you maybe 60-70% there and get you some visibility and accountability. Now, the power comes in is once I start having service desk integration, like, by the way, back into our own service desk, like VSM. What I'm able to do now is start automating that change dynamically from the log. So let's just select a few here. So there's our friend, right? This big
Yep.
me, and put in. And, some of these changes, right, there's going to be a lot of noise in the log. And that's one of the downsides, but we help you identify those changes. So in this case, I'm just going to scroll over a bit here so we can start seeing the values and property names. You can see that now, the service is starting up, starting down. Here's where we changed the actual service account sitting here.
Yep.
Okay, so lots of functionality to grab there. But let's just grab some of these changes, and let's just say that some of them, okay, let's set the reconciliation type on these. Some of them were approved, okay? So we'll go ahead and put in an RFC number here. All right, and approve it. Life's good, and it's going to come back and give me this great icon, which, by the way, I roll up into a dashboard that says these were approved changes. But I also have the capability of saying, those changes were noise, or the capability to say they were out of band, which is exactly what we're getting ready to do here in a second. So now let's go ahead and refresh this guy. Okay, and then now we're going to scroll back down, and you'll see there's our little icon right there for the good changes. Well, now let's go ahead and detect one here that was definitely a bad change. Okay, and so now we have the capability, by the way, I should just drag and drop these. I just slice and dice the data in many different ways. So let's just pick that services one that we saw before, or this one right here too, built-in users. So here's where he actually came back in. Let's do this one. Here's where we change the service account.
Yep.
Right? And that's an out-of-band change, right? So now we have the ability to come back in, set that reconciliation type, and say that change is out of band. Okay. All right, next. And we're done there. Now we have a little icon that pops up and says that change is out of band. Okay. Negatory. Red
Yep.
X there. Now, a couple things to notice, too. Whenever you see this icon right here, that means that rollback is available to you. That means that you can make that change, roll back to the previous state. So it's pretty powerful amongst the tools to be able to leverage that and set that. So now what I could do is say, okay, right click, let me roll back that change. Lots of capability around that. I can even sort it out by that, so I can sort it up and down by that, or I can drag and drop again into this column grouping and say, hey, show me everything that's available for rollback based upon some of the changes that we found in the log. So lots of flexibility and then lots to tie around change detection. So these are all the ones I can't roll back, but if I want to expand this guy out now, here's all the ones that I can roll back.
So that's interesting. So if somebody makes a major bunch of changes outside of VCM, let's say, so non-VCM initiated changes, and let's say the next morning I get in and I can no longer access a particular service or a particular host or etc. I could go in here and say, what were the changes made last night, or even what were the changes made on this particular machine. Just drag them up there, say, here's all the changes that are made, here's all the changes that are available for rollback, and just basically say right click and put this thing back the way it was before somebody touched it.
Yep, you're right on the spot. So, and that's the scenario here. Highlight these guys. There were changes that were out of band, and then now I can right-click and roll back those changes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it just gives you the ability to go back to that previous state, or I can start making other changes to get me to the next desired state. So lots of capability, and I wanted to really make sure we showed that. Now, we're not done with this piece. We're going to get back to this in a few different ways with service desk integration, and then again with higher level dashboards. And I think maybe that's a good place to go now since we're up here, is starting to take a look at, so you can see right here is once I have it integrated into Service Desk, I can manage what's happening within Service Desk directly from here. So you have two options. You can do it from the Service Desk or from here. One of the things that I typically find from my experience, Dave, is that if I'm an admin, I don't like going into Service Desk all the time, right? That's multiple interfaces I have to use. Like, for the example, if I wanted to roll back these changes and I didn't have Service Desk integration, I would identify all these changes, leave this interface, go back into Service Desk, re-identify, execute those, re-identify what they were, wait for them to go to the cab, and then have to come back here to execute those changes. That's a lot of work, right? A lot of manual effort, a lot of manual error can take place. In this new era of automation and cloud computing, I want to automate. So if I can do it directly from here and just set it, forget it, have it execute, and then follow up that those actions took place correctly, that's really the stage I want to get to of automation.
Yep.
Okay, so let's go ahead and just take a look at the Service Desk piece. So now we've identified a few there just so that we have some results coming back in. And now you can see, like, job denied. So this is another great area that we don't focus on enough. This will actually show me what jobs are pending out there. So if we have a bottleneck within the environment that's not approving tickets, if I have a training issue, like this one could be, so we'll drill down into this in a second. So what jobs have been denied out there, how many emergency changes have been executed. So lots of different ways to look at this. Let's take a look at this job denied. So now when I drill down into this, you can imagine in a larger organization how many changes would be sitting out there. So this was a reboot. So this was probably a reboot that took place, someone wanted to reboot a box in the middle of the day with Service Desk integration turned on, and then it got denied. And then you can trend this over time as well, too. Now here's the big one, though. It's reconciliation. Here's where I take, again, those changes that you mentioned, Dave, that could have taken place last night, out of band. I don't see them within Service Desk. I caught them within VCM. How can I start reconciling those to capture what did not go through the process? This is super powerful when I tie back into VSM, which we'll take a look at towards the end of the demo. Because now I have everything that went through the process, but then everything outside of that process, and then have the capability to capture those deltas as well. And that's where I want to be. I want to have full visibility and accountability. So here's all the ones that before that we highlighted, right? When we had added that certain individual, lots of things changed within his account, his status, his permissions, log on to the service rights, so on and so forth. So now I have all these changes in band. Well, what about this one? This is one that we didn't find back in VSM, right? We didn't find this back in our Service Desk solution. It never went through the process. So let's go ahead and just drill down right into this guy, and you can see I can do this based upon day, a week at a time, but I can take this as, as far back as 6 months or as far back as I'm retaining that data.
So that kind of gives me a feel for how well I'm doing, right? From a change management process. If I go in there and say, how did I do last year? And there's 40% of it or 50% of it is out of band. I know I'm not really following my processes the way I should be.
Yeah, Dave, you actually hit on a really great point. I'm glad you brought that up and clarified it in that way, because this is about measuring change management. Change management has been instilled in our lives as IT professionals for many years now, and we haven't really been able to measure it. I mean, I can come back and say, I have less incidents, or, my problems don't seem to be trending out the same way. We're lowering the amount. But the one thing you can't account for is that out-of-band change, how many people are actually adhering to the process. So if there's a lot of out-of-band change taking place, Service Desk is just not going to tell me anything about that. I just know I have an outage, I need to fix it, and there's always costs associated with that, but I can't measure, is change management really doing anything for us? So in this case, you're exactly right. Last year at this time, maybe we had 20% changes that we couldn't reconcile that were taking place out of the process. Now this year, because we were capable of discovering that, we only have 5%, because people are now, have the stick behind them. If I
Sure.
catch you making a change out of band, I'm writing you up, and you will possibly lose your job.
Yeah, absolutely. It helps. It helps that entire process, and like you said, the measurements are critical.
Yep. So we just hit change, and we focused on that a little bit. So let's just start kind of making our way. So Dave mentioned before, we have the virtual environment. I'm going to touch on this really, really quickly. So managing hosts, the associated guests on top of those hosts, network storage, so now we really start doing compliance across the stack in that virtual environment because the infrastructure is so tightly coupled, so being able to manage that from one centralized location and then being able to put compliance on top of that is huge. How many snapshots I have running on VMs, looking at the logs in one centralized location, and then also managing my vCenter infrastructure as well too, host profiles, inventory across that environment. Enterprise applications, this is great because here's where we start taking things up the stack a bit. And one of the things I love to look at are things like SQL Server. So if you look at SQL Server, this is a huge part of audits, and I can tell you this from personal experience. The idea and the concept of shadow IT, Dave, and this has become more proliferated with virtualization. Shadow IT is when someone goes out and buys an application or has a standing infrastructure like servers out there that are not being managed by IT, mostly because they just don't know. So as you can imagine, Dave, now you and I, we run multiple VMs on our systems, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So when we're running those VMs out there, well, all of a sudden what starts happening, is those VMs a lot of times aren't managed. We may not have antivirus running on them. There's lots of things that are missing out there. Well, imagine now with things like SQL. So as I look at SQL, I have all my different accounts out there, attributes, how many versions I have, which, by the way, this is really hard to answer when someone says, how many versions of SQL do you have? Is it SQL Express? Is it full-blown? Is it standard? Is it enterprise? But the biggest culprit is definitely this one right here, is do I have a blank SA login? I have seen this many times where, like, finance will go out, purchase a product, let's say it's for lending or whatever, and then the vendor that comes in and supports that application is like, just leave the SA password blank, right? Because they just want to get it installed, up and running, and then once that password is left blank, it is extremely difficult to go back and change it because of the dependencies throughout that application. So just little things like this up at the application layer are great to be able to come in, sort this out, and say, okay, great, we are in compliance, but we don't need to do anything about that. Same thing with the Oracle side of the house, too, being able to manage my views across Oracle infrastructure, and we definitely couple this to compliance, which I'll show you guys here in a second. All right, so coming back in, a couple of things. Let's just switch off. I know we have some other ones on the Unix side, but this is more of a general, quick, high-level overview. Some of the things that I'm going to want to see is, again, if someone asks me for a report, how many different, .NIC systems do you have out there? So when it comes to Mac, when it comes to Linux, when it comes to AIX, Solaris, how many systems do you have out there within your infrastructure? Now I can quickly provide a dashboard that shows me that, but then again, take action off these dashboards. Right-click, reboot all my ESX boxes out there. Let me just look at my Mac OS, and then I can also filter these out by machine group. So if I wanted to, I could set up a higher level filter up top to just show me certain types of machines out there within the environment. And this is big because this is how I start creating those roles. These are the systems you can see. These are the ones that you can or can't take action against. So this capability of setting up machine groups at a higher level or being able to filter them out, define filters directly from here is also great as well too. So it gives me the capability to define filters based upon any kind of data type that I want to be able to pull back in. So whether it's OS name or whether it's a driver sitting on those boxes. So in this case, we're looking at Mac OS. Now I'm going to go ahead and sort that out, click apply. And then when I come back here and hit the general dashboard, I could also start setting them up at a higher level if I wanted to as well with these machine names. So lots of different ways to be able to do that as well.
So that's
the product, these filters are just massive. And I know you've seen this in the compliance engine as well too, right, Dave?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So there's a couple things here on this screen before you leave it I wanted to point out. First, so you're tying that back to the roles and the logins that we talked about earlier. So if you had, for instance, someone or a group that were the Unix administrators, that would be one of the ways you could filter everything out for them to say, look, you only need to see the Unix environment, and we'll create a machine group for you that just has your Unix machines in it, and that is the container that you will start with when you log into the system, and you can't get outside of that container. correct?
That's exactly 100% correct. And then we can still give them the capability to do a lot of the things we want them to do, like be able to come in and take action against groups. So I'm not changing all my local admin passwords on the Windows side. Why not change my root passwords? Right here on the Unix side as well too. So I can still give them a lot of capability, but you're right, it's a container that they're now in as a starting point, and they cannot leave that container unless we decide to give them more extensive rights.
The other thing that was interesting, and I know this is obvious to some, but it's not to everyone. If you can jump back to the general machines screen there, one of the things I always get questions on is, so you guys, are just for the virtual environment. And yeah, we're very strong in the virtual environment. Obviously, that's the direction, the world is going, and we want to be there as a leader. But you can see here, obviously, we're doing a lot of work here in the physical environment. So you've got HPUX, you've got Sun. I know we've got AIX covered. It doesn't happen to be in this demo, but, that's one of the things that I get asked all the time, George. I don't know if you get that all the time.
Absolutely. So we still have a lot of folks out there. Obviously, we want people to migrate from P to V and start virtualizing as much as they can, on the application side and leverage those benefits of virtualization. But, here in this case, you have HPUX, so you have the capability now to manage these machines in the infrastructure and really start getting visibility and put compliance around them as well, too. So it's another great point. It's virtual and physical, and starting to get all of those in one view. Now, we're going to touch lightly on patching, but imagine the power of that when it comes to patching. So now I don't have to have a separate tool for my Linux side, Unix side, Windows side, and then, for my guests. Now I have that one consolidated view. So we're doing some things, moving forward with assessment on the host side and then verification on the host side. Right now, you're definitely going to use VUM to be able to deliver those patches, but you're going to see more and more of a consolidated end-to-end physical, virtual patch and compliance status right from VCM.
Great.
Okay, so a couple more things to touch on here. So, you can obviously see all the data that we collect up here, whether it's software inventory, we definitely, so software provisioning. So this is something that we do on the Windows side, be able to deliver packages across the infrastructure. We like to show this through compliance. So I'll give you a great example there here coming up. But traditionally, software provisioning has been, I'm going to blow it out there to the entire infrastructure. You're going to take it, I'm not going to check for conflicts. We do this through compliance to be able to avoid those things. So very intelligent application provisioning, as well as OS provisioning, so being able to spin up ESX, ESXi, and then Windows and Linux as well too, and on the virtual format as well. But let's go back to our example that we were talking about before. So if I look at local accounts now, okay, now we should be able to capture that change back in and just give you an idea of the graphical format here. Passwords that are expired, so this is proactive now. Instead of having that person calling up service desk, I now know that that's expired and I can come in and take action against those. Password expiration status, I love this one, right? Because look at this with admins. 73 passwords set to never expire. I wonder if that passed a compliance check. I doubt it.
Unlikely.
Not likely, and this is always a typical scenario too, where I'm going to lock everybody else down, but as an admin, I'm going to go ahead and set mine to never expire. Happens all the time. But let's come back up here, right? And by the way, so we can do this. This is local that I'm showing you right here. Well, we can extend this all the way up to directory services as well too. So I can do the same thing up here, right? My domain accounts and start looking at things from this level as well. So here's all my domain accounts within the environment. Rename the accounts, change the passwords, view the history, so the same type of information, but it's across the stack. So locally, shares, up at a domain level as well too. But when I come back into local accounts here, what I wanted to show was you come back in, and now we should see our friend here, and there he is right off the bat. I didn't have to sort it out, but I'm going to sort it out just because it's cool and I love doing it, and you guys will love it too. When I take this by name and I move it into column grouping, right, now we start seeing him in here. Okay, so we grabbed him by SID, he's there, password set to never expire, he's a full-blown admin, and then we can go ahead and just do this. Edit the properties, and you can see now all the different functionality. And again, I selected, Dave made a great point. I selected one machine, but I could easily do this and bring over every machine and change them all at the same time. Okay, and now we're going to take his account, disable it, But here's where we want to tie in that scenario from before. And by the way, I can run the action now or schedule it for change management approved window. But we know that there's a service account running. But in most environments, you would never know that he was running that service account. I mean, Dave, can you think of another way before I go to disable his account that, how to check to see if he's running services accounts across the enterprise?
Yeah, just the painfully manual way of going to every single one of those boxes and just checking it, which no one's going to do. It's easier just to turn it off and wait for someone to complain, actually. which is not very very service.
We call it sneaker net, baby.
Yeah, not very service oriented. But let's be honest, if you're talking 50 or 60 servers out there, that's the easier way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. But see, in this case, it's just really simple. I mean, this is easy. I just went back in and said, okay, I better check my service accounts. And by the way, there he is. And then I can also extend that. So remember before, viewing the history, this is another important piece, right? I can actually come in and view the history on these boxes to see what's changed on these guys. So again, I mean, I can do these by, date, run a date range across these boxes, come back and get, reporting type information on what some of these changes were that were made. And we don't talk about this enough, that historical information in that repository. So now it's coming back and it's showing me everything that changed across that box. Really, really slick to be able to come in and do some change analysis or some drift analysis on these machines as well, too. And again, I can start setting up filters across these, or the other thing that I'm able to do as well is I'm also able to drag and drop, even directly from the reports as well, to be able to see what changes have been made across these systems. But in this case, right, we know that that our friend here was being replaced with someone else, which was Picnic that we saw earlier, right? Problem in computer, or problem in share, not in computer. So when I come down here by share, it's the same type of thing. I can start looking at the same rights, so who has access to these payroll shares. I can add users, remove users, or I can do it by share. So you can imagine that if we would have built an account for him, if he would have had access to different shares before we disabled it, or when we want to manage his permissions, we can do that all directly from here and start seeing what rights people have to different parts of the environment. So in this case, it's everyone, and look at what rights everyone has. The payroll share, multimedia share. So you start getting the idea. You do a lot of, this is manually the way an admin typically uses the tool at first, which is complete situational awareness. Show me what's going on in my environment. Let me dig down to that data. But Dave, what we really want to do down the line is automate, right?
Yeah, I mean, the amount of data here, even if we make it actionable, which we do, it can be overwhelming. You need something just to go out there and tell me what's wrong. What happened last night, and how am I no longer safe and secure, right?
Yeah, that's really it. I mean, I really need to start automating this stuff, So one of the greatest scenarios ever that we always catch in almost every account is minimum password length, So if I come down to my local policies here, and I'm going to drag and drop my minimum password length here, we see this everywhere, where a lot of them are set to 0, some of them are set to 3, So now it's very easy to be able to get in that box. That means that my local policy, what if it's overriding my domain policy? Now I have a backdoor entrance to those systems out there. So just having these checks all the time, and by the way, I want to show you again, to Dave's point, how to automate this piece is massive. But at first, this is always the way I see people using the tool, is coming in and doing manual checks like this, and then manual changes across the environment. All right, but let's get to that automation piece just really, really quickly here. The automation piece is compliance. I mean, and this is it. This is the meat of the tool. It can do a lot of other things, as you just saw. Great way to come in and do some forensic analysis, but this is what you want to buy this product for, is definitely compliance. So as I start expanding out compliance, a few things you're going to see. Remember we started up top with those great dashboards? Those dashboards are being driven by the content that exists down here. So those great group of folks, CP&C, that I'm lucky enough to work with on a daily basis, they go out and do checks with NIST, DISA, CIS, PCI Security Council, to take the latest and greatest content that they're supplying out there as best practices, regulatory and your own best practices right internally, and they take those and then convert them back into readable format that you can apply against your environment on a daily basis and start building out IT balance scorecards to benchmark your environment. So here's the rule groups. The rule groups are the actual content that I can pick and choose, right? So this is the format we deliver them to be able to leverage against my environment. So you see Center for Internet Security, and I've been talking to these guys like on a weekly basis. I mean, they're just great folks out there, provide a ton of content. COBIT for you auditors out there. Federal Desktop Core Configuration, which, by the way, we're moving to the next standard here in 2012. You know, so you can see across the board all the NIST guidelines coming back in. NERC and FERC energy sector. Dave, this is huge, right? I mean, this is a big, big, big sector for us. As I scroll down, well, here's the big one, right? PCI DSS. You guys can see DISA down here too, which we just updated their guidelines. But let's take a look at just one of these, and let's focus on PCI. PCI, again, very, very hot topic right now. I had Dave at least 10 calls over the last 2 days about the new supplement that was delivered out there where people are questioning mixed mode type environments in PCI. And VMware's definitely got a ton of solutions to help you out, you know, with that type of posture out there. So this is one of them, right? When you start looking at what's happening within the guest environment, I don't want to have to create these rules, you know, on a daily basis or use scripts or, you know, have to constantly manually update these as the PCI regulations change or as my own environment adopts new policy. I want to be able to automate the delivery of these against my systems out there. So a couple things to look at. One, just take a look at the rules out here, you know, so don't want to create these. This is one that we just looked up top, which was a manual check that Dave and I did. Now you see where we've automated this check via compliance. So now I can just run this thing out there, get it back in a report where I don't have to search for it. And if it's out of compliance, it's going to alert me, notify me, you know, SMTP, SNMP, lots of ways to do that. As we go to edit this rule, you know, so let's look and see how this rule was built. It's going right back to the PCI requirement itself. Okay, it's giving me a high-level description, and then, by the way, I can reference check back to the PCI security standards. Okay, so lots of capability to make sure that we're doing the right checks within the environment. Now, how do we gather that information? Where are we going to? So here's all the different data types that we collect from, and by the way, I can extend all this out, but in this case, it happens to be registry. A really slick, great option that makes things easy as a double check is the dynamic rule check. When I do a dynamic rule check, I'm actually looking at, you know, a gold certified machine to be able to do the same thing. So now I'm going to come back and I'm going to say, you know what, on this box, and let's just go ahead and pick a box that's similar. Okay, on this box, I want to make sure that this setting within the registry always looks like the one on this box, my gold certified machine. This is super key when it comes to things like antivirus. Always look like that antivirus server.
Okay.
Okay, so now you can see that this rule must exist within the registry. I click next, and then here's where it's coming back, doing my check against the registry key, and I can change this to fit my rules within the environment. So 7's not good enough, we just moved to 12. I can do it all in one location. I can verify the execution of this. Now here's where we do remediation in different ways as well too, so software provisioning. So now I can go out there and send out a software package if that's part of it, you know, so if I want to install Firefox across the environment, or if I want to install Office, whatever package, you know, Adobe and Java patching as well too, whatever I want to do as far as software provisioning, I can also do that directly from here with a compliance check. All right, so now I go through, execute it, done. So that's how those rules, I'm able to copy those, clone those, and by the way, if someone modifies these rules, that's going to show up as well too. You know, so who created these rules, but then last modified date. So we always try to keep the integrity of the original rule. Right here, if you see again this icon, that means that it's enforceable. So now I can automate the changing of that setting. Once I have these built, and by the way, you can see them all over the place, all the vSphere hardening guidelines. I'm going to scroll up here for some of the software distribution ones we have, replacing Symantec with McAfee, which is, you know, extremely difficult to do in large environments, so we run across that all the time. Those rules belong somewhere. You know, here's where I have to benchmark them. So I don't want to, if I'm in healthcare, especially, Dave, I don't want to do PCI on Monday, HIPAA on Tuesday, you know, DISA on Wednesday. I want to encompass them in one location where I can measure and manage and set benchmarks for my environment. That's a template. The template houses those rules and then executes on what the parameters are of them and then show me whether I'm doing good or bad in my environment. So let's go back to that same rule group. So here's PCI DSS, Server 2008. And it's going out there right now and running, over 2,000 different evaluations against these different boxes within the environment to be able to provide that higher level IT balance scorecard, which is going to show me exactly where it is I need to focus my efforts first. And that's one of the biggest pieces of compliance. I was just talking to a few auditors yesterday, Protivity and some other folks out there, that were saying that what they see is people never know where to start. Well, in this case, I come back and you can see, yep, we ran 2,323 rules against 13 boxes out there, and it comes back with some information as to what were my critical rules, okay, right here, and then across what vital machines, mission critical systems. I want to focus my IT effort right here, upper left-hand corner. Now, all this matters, okay, but if I can focus my effort here first, now I'm starting to mitigate the risk within my environment. If I scroll down, again, the power of the repository database is showing me, am I getting better or worse? I want to see green go up over time, past 58%, more into the 70s, 80s, and eventually the 90s. And then I can also drill down directly from here. Now, this is one of the things I love, from dashboard to details. If I wanted to, I could right-click, enforce directly from here, or add an exception. So this is a business risk need. I understand that this rule shows non-compliant, but in my environment, it is compliant because I have a business risk need for accepting that risk. Okay? But in this case, I'm going to drill down, and it's going to come back and it's going to show me all the different data types. I'm going to scroll over and again, slowly drag and drop rules up in here. And it's going to show me all the rules that were broken within the environment. Okay, and now I have the capability to take action on these. There's a good friend, right? Minimum password linked. Came back to haunt us again. So here's the automated way of doing it. I just got alerted, right-click, enforce directly from here. But again, I can set up auto enforcement. All right, so a couple things as we're wrapping up. You guys can see definitely a lot more of the product, the administration side. Here's where I can come in and do all kinds of setting up of the product, setting up the roles, which, by the way, dynamically I can set up these machine groups and lots of other things here. Machine snapshots, here's where I can take a snapshot of a system at any point in time. Okay, so let's call this guy test. Next, I select a box, any box out there. And then now I have the capability to take a snapshot. This is just a configuration snapshot. I'm not storing an image out there. I'm just taking a snapshot of this machine at this point in time to where I can compare it to itself and other machines just like it for configuration drift. So here's the source name, here's the snapshot name, and we'll get to how to compare those in a second. But one of the things I really wanted to show here, is coming back into console. Okay, and this idea of massive change and being able to tie into service desk. So, just to keep the changes simple, I could actually come back in here, and at any given time, Dave kind of pointed this out when I first started the demo. Instead of clicking one arrow, I could do this, right? And that can be a really bad thing, I could come in and just reboot the entire environment. Because I'm a nice IT guy. Kill, delay. Next, run the action now. And right now, Dave, what would happen if I press next and finish?
You'd be fired, more than likely.
He's exactly right. It's a good way to put it. There'd be bells and whistles going off all over the place, right? So what we want to do is tie back in a service desk. Okay, so we have a couple different ways to do that. I'm going to come in, I'm going to enable, right, our integration back into VSM. So this is Service Manager, VMware Service Manager, which is a tremendous tool. It's cloud ready. Really shows you deep workflow as to what's happening across your environment from a process standpoint. So whether it's change, whether it's config, problem, it's really a nice, slick, easy-to-use interface out there that's ready to go for your virtual and cloud infrastructure. Again, it handles physical, like the rest of our management products do, but one of the great things about it is that it also focuses on virtual as well. So let's go ahead and just log into this guy. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're going to have multiple, again, this is just, it amazes me, Dave, like how we would do this, 12 years ago.
Oh,
Our virtualization in VMware is incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, just the ability to do all of these things on one box and one VM is just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it just blows me away time and time again. I mean, how we're capable of doing this, and this is just a great example of how we're able to come back in and do things like that. So it looks like our stuff is turned on here, and I'm just waiting for VSM to log in. So while we're waiting for it to log in, let's come back, and hopefully the demo guys are with me here. And we're going to come back, and look what happened when I went to select reboot of machines. So in this case, it came back up and said, great, buddy, you want to bounce these boxes? You have to create an RFC. So directly from our interface, you have to create an RFC. Now, we could set this up to where you had to have an RFC beforehand, but that's kind of the older way of doing things. We're talking about being able to execute everything from one interface without having to go to multiple places. So in this case, let's go next. Emergency change, everything would be audited and logged right through Service Desk. Here we're going to select just the one box. Okay, and just send a nice little note out there. Put a delay on it. Next. Oh, boo, I didn't like that. Okay, now we're going to run this action now. Finish. And we're done. And I guarantee you, if I didn't have Service Desk Integration turned on, you would see a little pop-up here as it was bouncing my VM saying, is it a product or is it a suite? Okay, so let's go ahead and log in here so we can check out what's going on. Now we're going back into the VSM interface. So while we wait for this guy to come up. Great. So now we went ahead and logged into VSM. And you can see right here we went to our request outstanding, which is on the change management side. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize that. We'll come back to it. But now when I come into VCM, you can see we have this pending request. And it's so funny how you close the loop. Here's where that request was denied before that we were looking at under our RFC process. But here we have this new request sitting out there. So as an admin, I executed it, but I never have to look at this again within the Service Desk side if I don't want to. But as a C-level person, I'm getting all this information being populated back into VSM. Who the admin it was that created the ticket, the affected machines, so on and so forth. So lots of advantages to be able to automate. I don't have the capability now to make out-of-band change within VCM. And in VSM, I get the benefit of automatic ticket creation. The C-level person gets to actually approve tickets that they know what the impact of the change may be and get like accurate information. So lots of stuff going on back on that side. So let's go back into Service Manager. Okay, and let me expand this guy and do a quick refresh. So what's happening now is we're going out there and we're going to get a heartbeat. So at some point, this is going to start populating back in on this side, and we'll be able to see that ticket come in. But you guys definitely get the idea of what's going on there. Okay, so now this is where this ticket's going to populate after it gets that heartbeat functionality. So let's give that guy a second. While we're doing that, one of the things I definitely wanted to make sure that we show folks is we put out free tools to be able to help you guys assess your environment from a compliance perspective. So in this case, it happens to be vSphere. So we can go out there and you can see we check against the first 5 instances within vCenter that you have of ESX. So now what I would do is I'd point it directly at my instance of vCenter, right? Get my credentials back in, and then I'm able to go out there and assess my compliance results. Or in this case, I'm showing you the last report that I ran. It's going to come back with a great high-level report to show me how I'm doing in my ESX environment. So green is good. As you can see here, all my checks across these 5 different hosts. Red is bad, right? And then now once I see red as being bad, I can say, well, what does that really mean? So now it gives me prescriptive guidance as to what that rule means, and then now I can start the path to remediation. This is a great tool, great way to go out there and start doing a high-level assessment of your virtual environment. And then obviously we have supporting documentation with it as well too. But look for more of these to come out from the Center for Policy and Compliance. But you can see a tremendous way to start doing checks across that part of your infrastructure.
I believe that tool is linked off of the VMware.com vCenter Configuration Manager product page.
Good, great, and thanks for that. So last thing, as we're wrapping up, okay, so here's closing the loop. You see 674 right here, so now we have an RFC populated. There's the reboot. And then when I double-click on this guy, it's going to come up and start showing me, what's happening within the ticket, and I can now take further action against that guy. So I can take action directly from here. It's showing me the box, everything that got populated back in. But what I like to see is I like to see the workflow itself. So now we're at this stage. The request started. There's the approval piece, and now what I can actually do is drill down directly into that guy, and I can go ahead and either approve or deny that ticket directly from here. So lots of different ways to be able to go out there, take action against the infrastructure, close the loop on change management, and then as well as doing CI population back into our database. So Dave, I think we probably ought to wrap it up there. Obviously, as you know, we could talk about this stuff forever, but this gives you a great high-level overview of VCM, and then also tying it back into multiple products, integrations that we can do out there as well as the compliance checker, which is something we don't want to lose sight of. Free tool to be able to go out there and assess your ESX environment.
Great, and first of all, thanks, George. Great job as always, and thanks everyone for joining us and listening. And hopefully, if you have any more questions about vCenter Configuration Manager, reach out to your VMware representatives, and hopefully hear from you soon. Thanks again, everyone.